surgeon who has been inspired by Dr. King. Dr. Kelvin has been practicing in Kansas City for more than 20 years. His work as a physician and medical practice owner, Dr. Walls experiences the abuses of the health insurance industry on a daily basis. He was motivated to volunteer for health insurance reform out of his support for President Obama. His interest is in making quality, affordable health care available to all Americans. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kelvin Walls.
Good morning. I would like to start by thanking our host, All Souls Unitarian Universalist Church, for hosting this event today. And also I'd like to send out thank you to our co-sponsors. I'm proud and honored to be your speaker today, and I can't think of any organization that better represents the principles promoted by Martin Luther King than MASW. They have served as a drum major for social justice in Missouri. This year's National Martin Luther Jr. King theme is Remember, Celebrate, and Act. A day on, not a day off. I want to share with you how my life has been transformed by people who inspired me to focus outside myself, to believe in the power of one person to collectively make a difference in our community, and to act on this belief. I've learned through my experience with organizing principles that it's relationships between people that allow for lasting change. Oftentimes, when a group of people come together with a common goal, and they begin to share their many differences and their many different backgrounds, they have more in common that they find out than they ever realize. This can be very powerful. So I'm going to tell you some things about myself so you can get to know me. I grew up in the Boot Hill, Missouri. That's way down in the southeast corner, Swamp East, for those of you know. And as many of you know, Pembroke County is one of the poorest counties in the state. I was one of 10 children. My older 3 siblings were required by law to attend segregated schools. Being the youngest of the 10 siblings, I was able to benefit at a younger age from the civil rights movement and the work of Dr. King. Although I went to racially integrated schools, I can still remember that there were white restaurants where we couldn't go, and we were designated to sit in the segregated section at the movie theaters in Haytop, Missouri. But we had it much better than my 90-year-old father did when he was growing up in Mississippi. He was a sharecropper who had only a 3rd grade education. His education was limited because he had to take on household responsibilities and work as the head of the household for his mother and 2 sisters. This was because his father had died when he was young. Being a healthcare provider, I was always struck by a story that my father told about trying to obtain health care for his sister who had a serious abdominal condition. It was a common practice of the time for the landowners to arrange medical care for the sharecroppers. This often involved a big debt and the loan that they would provide for the sharecroppers that had to be paid off usually through the life of their service on the plantation. My father, in a bold move, had risked his own personal safety went around this system. He went directly to the physician, making arrangements and making his own payments, and finding out in the process that the landowners were not responsible for any of the care, that the government made all the payments. It was this story, as well as many other experiences about people being saddled with big debt in order to be able to get basic services such as health care, that led me to be involved in healthcare reform. My father was subsequently able to leave Mississippi as a young man, eventually was able to rent land and then own his own farm in Missouri. Despite hardships, my parents dedicated their lives to making sure their children had everything they needed. and that include quality education. All of my siblings attended college. I attended the University of Missouri for undergrad and medical school, and subsequently went to the University of Kansas for my ENT training. While I was at KU and rotating between the Kansas City VA Medical Center and KU, I met my wife, Sarah Starnes, a social worker and fellow member of MASW. I never thought that I'd find my wife at the VA. That government-run healthcare system has a lot more to offer than most people realize. I finally got a real job at age 32 and was feeling pretty good about helping people through my work as an ear, nose, and throat physician and head and neck surgeon. I've been in practice now for over 17 years, and I continue to be able to enjoy the type of work that I'm doing. But I find it at many times increasingly frustrating to be able to run a medical practice. Insurance companies have far too much control in my practice. In Missouri, 80% of the health insurance market is controlled by 2 companies. My practice of 9 doctors employs nearly 30 people whose sole responsibility is to plead with insurance companies to ensure that patients get the benefits that they've already paid for, as well as take care of other administrative practices involved with billing and transferring of paper. How nice it would be if this manpower could be used for direct patient care. Even though many people think that going to the emergency room is free health care, and that's because basically hospitals are required by law to provide care, people still receive a bill, and often a hefty one, when they go home. As soon as a patient is discharged from the hospital, there's no obligation by the hospital to provide any follow-up care. A good example of this that I think is worth noting: you go into the emergency room, you can't breathe, you get diagnosed as pneumonia. The hospital has to take care of you. You come on death's door to them, they will. But get diagnosed with cancer as the cause of your pneumonia, get discharged and go home. Now you get a big bill for the most expensive care possible, and you're required on your own to take care of your crippling, ongoing cancer diagnosis. Medical debt has become the leading cause of bankruptcy in this country, and the national economy cannot sustain the current growth in healthcare costs. I am an ENT, I'm the only ENT in Eastern Jackson County that does facial trauma, and I think this is predominantly because trauma patients tend to be uninsured. I regularly see patients that come in with advanced disease that forgo their follow-ups, mainly because of the interest of not being able to pay. I also am well aware that Medicare is the most reliable and efficient payer that we have. And contrary to what some people believe, it is a government-run healthcare program. Now, I realize that the MASW is a nonpartisan organization, but let us not forget that Dr. King was all about empowering people to fully participate in the democratic process, and that included people's involvement in politics. Many of Dr. King's accomplishments were achieved through community organization principles. He knew that alone he was no force to be able to tear down the walls of segregation and racism in this country. Nor did he assume that any single success that he had would return our country to a post-racial society. He knew that hard work, the work of getting others to participate, to take action, was the key to turning around a power dynamic that was going on at the time. Martin Luther King said, "Let us march on ballot boxes until we send our city council, state legislators, and United States congressmen, people who will not fear to do justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God." Dr. King could not have been elected to public office, as he and other martyrs of the civil rights movement were predominantly involved with making sure we had the right to vote. Now that we have this right to vote, we must help our children and future generations understand that this sacred right must not be squandered. I'm going to read you an abbreviated quote from Dr. King and ask you if it sounds familiar in the context of the current health care reform debate. Dr. King said, "Toward the end of Reconstruction era, the leaders of the populist movement began awakening the poor white masses and former Negro slaves to the fact that they were being fleeced by the Bourbon interests." Now here, the Bourbon interest represents the conservative wing of the Democratic Party, and this was a party that existed between 1876 and 1904. These were pro-business people that had a pro-laissez-faire economic principles that they espoused. Now, returning to Dr. King's statement, they, the populists, began to unite Negro and white masses into voting blocks. They met this threat, the Bourbons, they met this threat of the uniting Negro and white masses by creating a segregated society. The Southern aristocracy began to engineer, through their control of mass media, they revised the doctrine of white supremacy. They saturated the thinking of poor white masses with this doctrine, thus clouding their minds from the real issues. They made it a crime for Negroes and whites to come together as equal on any level. And that crippled and eventually destroyed the populist movement of the 19th century. Thus, the threat of free exercise at the ballot by the Negro and the white masses alike resulted in the establishment of a segregated society. They segregated Southern money from poor whites. They segregated Southern mores from rich whites. They segregated Southern churches from Christianity. They segregated Southern minds from honest thinking. And they segregated the Negro from everything." End quote. I don't think it's too difficult to see the clear parallels between the post-Civil War origins of racial segregation and the current day attempts to inflame race hatred in order to keep people divided for the purpose of advancing laissez-faire economic system in which unfettered, motivated profit determines how people interact with one another. And so we remember, Dr. King did not die so that each one of us could think only of our own welfare. He died for the universal principles in all world religions, including Christianity, that we have the obligation to do justice, love, and mercy. Dr. King helps us to understand that we each can lead in our own way, that we each can be our brother's keeper, and that we each can take action to ensure that every person has the basic rights of freedom. He knew that a person's rights can best be exercised when he or she are free of hunger, pain, and disease and ignorance. As Dr. King has said, all the forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane. I believe Dr. King would be very disappointed to know that 45,000 people die each year simply because they don't have health care insurance. I think he'd be disappointed to know that another 45 million Americans are stressed and burdened with medical debt because they don't have adequate coverage. I further believe that health insurance reform is the most important social justice issue of our generation, and it's this belief that has motivated me to do what I can to bring opportunities for affordable, quality health care to all Americans. I never, in my wildest dreams, imagined that I'd be calling on complete strangers interacting with people that I don't know on the street, asking them to support Barack Obama or to support health care reform. But I have learned that through all of this, that the inconvenience and the scary situations of being in unfamiliar surroundings is no match to the cause of trying to achieve social justice. For both the presidential election and healthcare reform, Sarah and I have hosted house parties, canvasses, phone banks, press conferences, educational forums, watch parties, and rallies. We registered hundreds, if not thousands, of voters. During the election, we canvassed in Iowa, Texas, Indiana, South Dakota, and Missouri. We were both delegates to the National Convention. We were neighborhood team leaders for the Get Out to Vote. I was the canvas captain, and Sarah was the staging location director for the Obama headquarters. We provided housing for the OFA staff and volunteers. We supplied sound bites for radio and television. We delivered 4,900 declarations of support for Obama's health care reform to Congressman Cleaver. We organized supporters to be strong, a strong civilized presence at town hall meetings for our congresspeople. I raised money for Obama for America and Organizing for America. Now let me emphasize here, and to me this is very important in the context of what we're talking about, that it was not about the power that I had to be able to do this. But looking at many of my friends here today, it was about the power of being able to duplicate myself by encouraging others to take action, to achieve quantitatable results. These folks joined us because of the trusting relationships that we had with them, because they had a personal investment in the work we were doing together, and I thank them for all of their efforts. So here we are, on the cusp of what we pray will be a monumental victory for social justice in this country. The health care legislation is not perfect, just like Martin Luther King Jr. and Barack Obama were and are not perfect. Imperfection, as you know, is inherent in the human condition. Nonetheless, this law and these men have made historic contributions to changing the way we treat one another in this country. We can each do our part to seize the power that Martin and Barack have shown us that we possess. We each can have the power to create unity in the face of diversity, to maintain hope in the face of tragedy, to focus on the positive and not the negative, to embrace the power of one. Ladies and gentlemen, we can't afford to take a day off. When I leave here, I will spend a good part of my day on in celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. by making calls into Massachusetts about tomorrow's special election to be filled by special election to fill. And we all know how important that election is. The question I have for you as we remember, celebrate, and act is how will you spend your day on? Thank you so much.